Hey there YouTube, it's Jim here again. I just returned from the park. I was flying my new T-28 that I bought at the hobby shop this last weekend. And one of the things that I did the first day I brought it home was I added this little tail hook modification so that I could practice aircraft carrier landings. When I went out to the park earlier, I took a couple of basically bricks and ran some fishing line between them. So one of the problems I ran into was because I added the tail hook on the aircraft, I produced some extra weight in the back of the aircraft. So when it flies, it tends to be a little tail heavy. So I compensated by putting a little weight inside the front cowl of the airplane. By doing this, I increased the overall weight of the airplane by about a gram, which unfortunately does mess up the flight characteristics a little bit. It does make it tend to want to fly a little more sluggishly. It basically raised the stall speed, so landings were a lot more difficult than they were before, especially when I'm trying to hit a 4-foot wide arresting cable. That didn't work very well, and you can see in the video that I missed the cable a lot. It was really hard to land the airplane. I think the next step is to take the tail hook off, take the weights off, and make a new tail hook out of some lighter material. But I'll go ahead and show you how I did this. You'll see inside the airplane how I put the tail hook on, and hopefully it'll inspire somebody else to do a better mod than I did. So yeah, there you go. Alright everyone, so here's how I added the tail hook mod to the airplane. I'll just show you right quick. Again, the tail in the back here. One of the things about this airplane, right out of the box, it has this hole pre-drilled in it. I'm not sure what the purpose of it is, but for this it actually worked out fairly well. It may be difficult to see here on the video, but what I did was I took my hobby knife and I milled out a small little, probably about a ½ inch area behind that hole so I could fit the tail hook mechanism. And that worked out pretty well. So I'll go ahead and show you inside the airplane now what I did. I'll have to remove the tape that's on the side of the fuselage that's holding it together. Just a little trick. One of the problems you may have is when you pull this tape up, you'll see that it actually pulls some of the paint with it. I found that a good way to deal with this. Now you could go the really fancy route and go to your hobby shop and find some enamel paint that matches. But what I did was I actually got a red Sharpie and am able to just take my red Sharpie and fill those in with the red Sharpie, and it actually does a reasonably good job of matching the color. Now up close, sure, it looks different, but when you go to fly, you won't notice in the sky. It's actually pretty close. So anyway, I'll finish that up later, but I just wanted to point that out. Anyway, once you get all the tape off, do on both sides, there's also some tape at the very back of the fuselage. I gotta get my lighting here. And once you get the top part of the fuselage off, you'll notice that the motor is attached to the top half, and there's a wire down here that's plugged into the receiver. Just make sure that you note how that wire is plugged in, so when you remove it, you plug it and put it back on later, you know where it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that right now and set it aside. So I just want to show you in here right quick what I've done. Now, since I last flew, I took the weights out, but before there were some weights. I had put some weights down here in the front of the airplane. I think I actually have some video of it before I took the weights out. I felt like they were too heavy and they were causing the airplane to fly kind of sluggishly. Anyway, you see here you have your aileron servo. Actually, that's the aileron servo right there. There's the bell crank for the aileron. I have another servo laying around, so I put that servo directly behind the bell crank, and you see I have a control rod running from that servo all the way back to where my control horn for the tail hook is. Maybe kind of hard to see from this angle. If I can get my lighting in there. But I'll show you basically how that works later. Anyway, the way I made the actual tail hook itself, just a quick look at that again. You see it's basically just a little bit of material. What I used for that is I took basically a cotton swab and I cut off the ends. I measured about, I think it was about 5 inches. Can't remember the exact measurements, but obviously it doesn't take that much material. Once you cut them off, what I had done was I sanded it down to try and remove some of the material, make it thinner, make it a little lighter. I also took a little bit of this white heat shrink tubing and put that around the cotton swab to get the sort of white navy colors that you normally see with the tail hook. This is good for aesthetics, but I think it's probably adding unnecessary weight. You can probably just paint it, but I was being lazy. So that's that. The other thing too is for the actual hook itself. That is just a staple from a stapler. I popped a staple out of there. I took my Dremel tool and I drilled a very, very tiny hole in one end of the cotton swab, and then that way I put the staple through the hole that I drilled with the Dremel tool on the cotton swab, and that's part of what the heat shrink tubing is doing. Is it's actually holding the staple in place, because the staple, even though the staple is sticking out the back like this, there's a hole going through the cotton swab in which that staple, it's not coming out of there. It's pretty well locked in. So this can bend any way it wants, but the staple is very securely fitted inside that control rod. Now, for the actual bell crank control horn itself, what I did there was I took a piece of scrap balsa, put it on one end of this thing, and glued it on there. So basically you had a small piece of scrap at the end of it. Took a Dremel tool and I drilled 2 holes in the scrap wood. One hole was for my control rod. The other hole was for the piece of carbon rod that I had as basically a hinge point. And it may be kind of hard to see here, but you see I got this little hole right here on each side of the airplane. There's actually a carbon rod running perpendicular to the landing hook that is holding the control horn for the tail hook in place, and that serves as the pivot point for the tail hook. You can't see it in here very well because it's buried, but that little black thing there is my piece of scrap wood. There's also a plastic washer that is helping it turn a little bit. That way it's not too loose in there. I had actually dug my foam thing a little too wide. And there you go. That's how you make a tail hook for a Parkzone Ultramicro T-28 Trojan.